Okay, right. Welcome to this last part of forensics, looking at how we deal with offending behaviour. So in this section, we need to cover things that include the aims of custodial sentencing, so prisons, the effects of that, recidivism, which means reoffending. Is that more or less likely if someone's been to prison? Behaviour modification, anger management, and restorative justice programs. So this first topic is looking at, does prison work? So custodial sentencing then, most systems have a variety of different sanctions that they use and can impose on offenders. So whether that is prison or what could be fines, it might be things like, what do they call it? I can't think what they call it. What do you call it? No, what do you call it when you what do you call it? Oh, because community service. So in the UK, most common form of punishment is the use of prisons, and it's our most severe sanction that we have. So there are, like I said, different forms of sentencing and different punishments we may use, but prisons ultimately is the main way in which we do that. The big question around it is, does it actually work? So we see on social media and we see on the news that actually people want harsher punishments. They don't think that the conditions of prison are necessarily reflective. It's just my dog running around with my slippers. They don't think they're necessarily harsh enough for the offences committed. So custodial sentencing has four main aims that we need for AO1. What is the whole point of custodial sentencing? So it's for retribution. Now what that means is that people feel like repercussions have been served. So if something has gone wrong or they've been a victim of a crime, they feel like punishment has happened and they feel better about it. That's just my dog chewing on his bone on the floor. Rehabilitation. So the ultimate aim, maybe not in this country, we're not very good at it, but in Switzerland, in Sweden and Norway, they will rehabilitate to get that person back out into society as a fully functioning member. Incapacitation. So they are locked away, they are taken off the streets, and acts as a deterrent. So this one's quite interesting. So I don't know if prison does that. For some people, it's attractive. If you are homeless, if you don't have, the right materials in order to survive, then prison is seen as the better option. So that's why we have it. Or RID, as a way of remembering it, RRID, rid offenders from society. So it's an acronym for you. So key definitions we have here, so you can add them in if you don't have them in your workbook. Now, if we think back to the Stanford prison experiment, we know the effects on the prisoners of that study. So two of them were desperate to leave, one of them did leave. We had them feel like they were burning up inside and it was the worst thing ever. They were physically malnourished and physically tormented, as well as mentally. They thought it was a real prison, they weren't escaping. So it's difficult to use his study in terms of real life application. It's not a real prison. They were all students, but it does give us an insight into how that situation can change people's sense of or grip on reality. Now, why am I saying this? Well, there are psychological effects of serving time in prison. And some people might argue that's a good thing and they should feel like this. Others would say, well, if it's not necessarily doing its job. So de-individuation is a really interesting concept where you end up adapting to the norms and values of a certain situation, and then you can't function in any other. So here, when I imagine when you go to prison, you're trying to make bonds and friends with the right people to stay, protected and to survive. So that way you become accustomed to prison life. You might even get worse as an offender, or you learn new ways of committing crime. So that when you leave prison, you're not equipped to be in day-to-day life, day-to-day world. Stress and depression. So stress and depression, well, we know what both of those things are. If you are, losing a sense of your identity and you're struggling to deal with or manage emotions or manage your grip on reality, obviously that's going to make you incredibly anxious. That might make you more likely to commit suicide. So here it's higher in the prison population than in any other. We took people who don't offend. Institutionalization just means how when you are institutionalized, your whole life changes and you're in a whole new environment. You might feel hopeless, lacking control. And then lastly, prisonization. So you are so equipped, you are so encapsulated in this environment that you lose a sense of your identity and you are treating people in inhumane ways. Okay, so that's where they match. So the question is, what happens when criminals leave prison? So what happens next? So recidivism is reoffending rates. And the Ministry of Justice in 2013 suggests that 57% of offenders will reoffend within a year, increased 2014 to 70%. Now, we can only imagine this will continue to increase. Lack of funding, lack of support, all of these things are going to lead to people not feeling well adjusted back into society, maybe not having, people won't employ them, they'll struggle to find places to live, and so reoffending is likely to happen. In Norway, they're the lowest in Europe because they are so focused on rehabilitation. So they're focused on getting our prison population back into work, providing them qualifications, giving them training and skills to make them more equipped to maybe mean they'll less likely offend. Now, when we talk about AO3 here, let's look at the psychological effects. So prison can be brutal. So this is supporting the fact that we do have psychological effects of prison. The Prison Reform Trust, 25% of women and 15% of men reported symptoms indicative of psychosis or schizophrenia. So being in an environment that is incredibly oppressive is going to potentially trigger disorders in those that maybe have a predisposition. On the flip side of that, people are going to argue, well, prison has to be a punishment. It has to be something different than a fine or doing some community service. It has to be something punitive. Obviously, we have individual differences. So we cannot say that all offenders are going to react in the same way to prisons. There are different regimes in every prison you go to. So you can't make conclusions that apply to every single prisoner. And then in terms of training and development, there are opportunities on release of prison. When you leave prison, there are opportunities to take on different training. And you do have a prison, no, not a prison officer, what are they called? You have somebody who works with you to make sure you're keeping on track, that they'll help you find employment. And depends on where you live in the country. If you're in a well-funded area, maybe you're in a city, there'll be more opportunities for you to have things like anger management, social skills training, rather than if you're in, somewhere rural. So it could be really good if they have access to programs. So your last job then is to look at these lesson outcomes. They're in the form of questions, and have a go at answering them. So the aims of custodial sentencing, apply it to some of the scenarios in the textbook, and have a go at a 16 marker.